after everything fell apart in a total disaster in the desert, the players all head to Portland, or rather, two of the players head to Portland, Emil and Stas, because everyone else is fucking dead. They drive all the way out to Portland, which takes a couple of days, and eventually they arrive there and start trying to figure out what they're doing. They were given like a rough person to contact, and I can't remember who, and in contacting that person, they're able to figure out that there's like a gather that they can go to get introduced to the local prince. They have no idea what the political situation is in Portland, but there is a prince apparently, and they can go introduce themselves. So they show up at this gather, and conveniently, a bunch of other vampires happen to also be there showing up, who have just arrived in the city and who have no other coterie to join up with. So the only players who survived, like I said, were Stas, who is no longer calling himself Stas. He's now calling himself Mickey, because he thinks that the Chicago vampires are trying to kill him, which they are. And Emil, who was absent the day that they got wiped, so actually had nothing to do with any of it, but decides to flee with them as well. And also Adrian, the NPC, who, because he also has now been marked for death, flees with them up to Portland. And when they arrive at Gather, they meet a bunch of NPCs who are the local bigwigs, I guess. One of these is an old Ventru guy who just goes by the Admiral, who's been around for a long time. Another one is Eleanor, who is this harpy, and right away the players don't really like her. And then there's also Cyrus, who is a computer hacker. Stas actually recognizes him as like a famous computer hacker from back in the 90s who got arrested for hacking into the FBI or something.
Hack the planet! Hack the planet!
Shut up and get in the car!
Hack the planet! Hack the planet!
And in addition to these fine folks, they meet another group of weirdos who are the new player characters.
The Alliance of Magicians, an organization that blackballs any performer who reveals a magician's secret.
One of them is Paul. Paul is a gangrel who dresses like a lumberjack, has an axe, and a big cow from as like a ghoul, and awkwardly is basically the exact same character as Emil. He has apparently been asleep for like 100 years in the woods and just woke up and was like, well, I'm awake. I guess I should go find some other vampires, find out what's going on. Then you have Gideon. Gideon is a Giovanni, although not a normal Giovanni. She's like a weightlifter, fuck you up, lots of potence Giovanni. The story with Gideon is that during the Gehenna Wars, she was supposed to be like bodyguarding this other group of Giovanni who all got massacred, and because she like fucked up, and I can't remember the exact details, whether she like wasn't there or she did something wrong, and the other Giovanni were pissed at her, so they tried to kill her, and she is now on the lam. I guess it's a common thing in vampire society that when you're like, everyone wants to kill me everywhere, I'll have to go somewhere where basically society doesn't exist and I'm free of all consequences. Portland. And then we have Director Ko. Director Ko he's a Toreador, is maybe like the single weirdest vampire character that I've run into yet in any of my vampire games. Ko is super fucking odd. First of all, he's like a really ancient Chinese guy who always wears this like veil and these weird robes and like a little crown, so you never see his face. We used to joke that he looked like the evil Pope, or like Emperor Palpatine or something, wandering around in his little Pope outfit. He also never speaks. He has a chorus of women who follow him around, who are ghouls, who speak for him. So he uses telepathy to communicate to the chorus. The chorus then speaks on his behalf. And so when you talk to Ko, he just stands there in his Darth Vader Pope outfit, completely silently. looking at you, you assume, although you can't see his face. And then he has 3 women who stand around him who all speak in unison for him.
Then, Reva, the mediator,
is deaf,
deaf,
born and hope to die.
and the 3 of you speak for him.
Yes.
In addition to this, he's completely fucking deranged. And I was never able to totally nail down what exactly his deal was or what he thought was going on, but my best approximation of it is that he thought that he was basically directing a play and the entire world was part of his play, and he was just like ordering people around in the play.
Wait till we get to Broadway in 6 months. If.
Wait till we get to Cleveland in 3 months.
Lloyd, my darling, are you all right?
I'm starting to know what God felt like when he sat out there in the darkness creating the world.
And what did he feel like, Lloyd, my dear?
Very pleased he'd taken his Valium.
In addition to being weird as fuck, Ko is actually someone who has been in Portland in the past. He's quite old. He's an elder. He is originally from, I think, Hong Kong, and he had, like 100 years ago, he'd come to America, and he'd been in Portland for decades. So he actually knows all of these older kindred who are around. But he left like 30 or 40 years ago and went back to Hong Kong, I believe, or wherever he was originally from, and has been absent this whole time. Now, the purpose of them all showing up here is to meet the prince, but the prince does not show up. And after a while of hanging out at Elysium and talking with various other NPCs, talking with each other, getting introduced around, the other NPCs, the other elders, start to like wonder, like, where the fuck is the prince? This is odd that she is not here. The players learn that the prince is I forgot the name of the clan. Tremere. Forgot what the Tremere were called for a second. The prince is a Tremere. The sheriff, who also has not shown up, is also a Tremere. And they're also both quite young. And they've only been like prince and sheriff for a few months. Portland, as it turns out, has been going through some strife. Starting about 20 years ago when the old prince of the city, who is still around and who is referred to as the mayor, retired. Just decided, I'm done being prince, I'm good, I'm retiring. Handed things over to his chilled. Shortly after that, the Gehenna Wars started, and then there was a series of problems. The players are given some details about this, and basically given a list of like the 15 different princes and like 7 different archbishops who have ruled over the city at different times over the past 20 years. There has been a non-stop war going on between multiple different factions trying to control the city. The vampires they have met here are what is left of the original Camarilla government that used to run Portland. But it is significantly weakened because most of its members have been killed in these wars. There is a Sabbat faction that invaded the city 20 years ago, has killed a lot of their princes, but also suffered significant casualties in the process. That Sabbat faction has also now split into 2 different Sabbat factions who are still both fighting the Camarilla, but are also possibly fighting each other. The Camarilla are not sure. They don't seem to be like on the same team necessarily anymore. There are also like 3 different Anarch factions who are also fighting everybody. The big one is run by these Bruja, but there's also like a Nosferatu Anarch faction who, again, don't seem to get along with the Bruja. There is also another faction of Camarilla who have come down from the north. Portland, if you don't know, is a like, what do they call it? Metropolis or metro area divided by a river. So the southern half, which is actually Portland itself, is in Oregon. The river is the border with the state of Washington. So the city on the other side of the river is actually Vancouver, Washington. So even though you can basically throw a football from one city to the next and people go back and forth between these cities constantly, they are technically 2 cities. In the old days, the old prince, the mayor, ruled over this whole area. But now a new faction of Camarilla have come down from Seattle, who are led by this new prince, who they refer to as the prince across the river, who basically doesn't recognize the old Camarilla as a valid government, sees them as a bunch of yahoos, and is trying to seize control of the entire area. And on top of that, there are also a bunch of werewolf packs all over the place, several of whom have attacked the vampires of late, mainly because there was some sort of fight between this Giovanni faction, who did something to piss off the werewolves. No one who is still alive seems to know what that was, but apparently the Giovanni all got killed by werewolves, and the werewolves have been real fucking touchy ever since. So things are going great. This new prince, who, like I said, has only been prince for like a month or two, just recently declared herself prince because her little Tremere faction killed some other people who were running things, declared praxis, and no one really cared to contest them. She is now not shown up for Gather like she was supposed to, and since there's been like 100% fatality rate on princes over the last 2 decades, the elders are immediately concerned that something has gone wrong. They don't really want to get involved, so they ask all the new folks to go and investigate. So the player characters are told, hey, you guys want to stay in the city? You need permission from the prince. We don't know where she is, might be dead. Here's her address. Go find out what happened.
Tonight, all new stories on the season premiere of Unsolved Mysteries.
When they get there, they find that, yeah, the prince has been murdered. Someone ambushed this house and killed a bunch of people. There's a dead ghoul. There are, like, ashed bodies around. It looks like someone cut open the door with a chainsaw, I believe. There are, like, marks across the walls as if someone, like, flamethrowered something in here, which is alarming to them. The sheriff is apparently was decapitated in his car in the garage. There's also crossbow bolts, like, stuck in walls. There's weird ash and this weird powder around that they find that they can't identify what it is. And local animals that they talk to tell them that there was a giant dog in the area and also a giant bear in the area. This is the first of a couple of examples of the players investigating a crime scene and not really doing all that good of a job of investigating the crime scene. A recurring theme in my campaigns, dating back many years, is that my players super fucking suck at crime scenes. Now, originally, I thought, as many people will tell you on the internet, if you like go on the internet and ask, like, how do I do investigations better in RPGs? People will always tell you, like, oh, the problem with investigations is that players don't find the clues because they roll too low to find the clues. So you have to make sure you give them the clues even if they roll low. In fact, there's an entire system called Gumshoe, which is designed based on and addressing this entire philosophy, the idea that investigations in tabletop games fail because people roll poorly and don't find clues. So Gumshoe is an entire system built around the idea that clues are discovered regardless of rolls. This, while I'm sure is a helpful piece of information for a lot of people, doesn't do fuck all for me, because the problem with my players isn't that they don't find clues, it's that when they find clues, they do nothing with them.
This is worthless.
My favorite example of this, and the most extreme one I've ever encountered, was from a cyberpunk game I ran many years ago, where not only did I have players who repeatedly forget that they were even cops, and like forget to even ask people for information, but I also had an instance in that game where one of the characters came home and was told that her door had been jimmied open. There was like a piece of paper lying on the floor and like her stuff had been disturbed. And her reaction to this was to check her refrigerator to see if anyone had stolen her food and then go to sleep. Then wake up the next morning and go to work. She never even picked up the note that had been left in the middle of her floor, the first thing you see when you walk into the room, with like a message from someone on it telling her about a crime. She just stepped over that to check to see if anyone had stolen her Mountain Dew. That still haunts me to this day. So the players need a place to stay. And because Ko has a bunch of money, he wants to buy a house. Eleanor, the harpy, takes them to a house and tells them, like, oh, I got this giant mansion that's up for sale. I'll sell it to you for a deal. Not mentioning that it's super fucking haunted. We'll get to that in another time. But, so they buy this super not haunted mansion. Don't worry. It's all good. Pretty quickly, they are approached by this thin blood named Lewis. Lewis shows up because he has heard that they are now in charge of his territory. Lewis is not, like, super plugged into the politics of vampires. He's a thin blood after all. The most recent interaction he's had with, like, the main vampires was that he was just grabbed off the street and forcibly branded with a mark showing him as a thin blood. So he's a little touchy about vampires in general. But he has heard that they are now in charge of this territory, which used to belong to the prince. And he comes to let them know that there's been a murder. There's another kindred, another thin blood, who previously was a cop. And he was investigating this series of murders. He got seized by the Tremere, turned into a vampire. The Tremere, who turned him a really low gen, so he ended up as a thin blood. And then just left him investigating these murders. And now he's dead. So Lewis tells the players about this so they can go check it out. And they do go check it out. They find a pretty similar situation at his house, where all of his electronics have been stolen. Someone broke in. He's been, like, killed and burned. He's turned into ash, and there's this powder around that they can't identify at first. They're going around, like, trying to spirits touch things and talking to cats. They had a long conversation with this cat where they asked it a bunch of questions about everything it had seen. Players do this a lot, where I'll be like, in my head, I'm like, the cat knows one thing that's useful. He knows the vehicle that they got into, and they'll be like, have you ever seen a person? Have you ever seen a person around here? Have you ever seen any weird people around here? And I'm like, how the fuck would a cat be able to, like, meaningfully answer, have you ever seen a weird person? It's a cat. Like, it sees people 100 times a day. They manage to piece together no information of any value to them at all, except for the fact that they figure out that this powder they're finding is garlic salt. The main clue that they're supposed to run into at all of these locations is that there's the same van showing up at all these murder sites. And in each instance, they managed to completely fail to figure out anything about this van. When they've been in the desert, Stas had been constantly hacking into, like, security cameras and traffic cameras, and so a lot of this mystery was based around them doing the same thing. They'll use a traffic camera to get a shot of the van, but for some reason they didn't do that here. I don't know why. The garlic salt was also another thing that they could have followed to find these guys. These people who were killing these guys have been going around to stores and buying up just, like, enormous amounts of garlic salt. All they would have to do is walk into a store and say, I'm just going to start asking about who's been buying tons of garlic salt. But they never did this. Again, it's not that they don't find the clues. It's that they just don't follow up on the clues. You've been to 2 murder sites, and at both murder sites, for some reason, someone had poured huge amounts of garlic salt around. That's weird. I'm not going to look into it further, though. And you're just like, you don't know how to handle, like, what do I do when they refuse to follow on clues? I don't know. After them bungling through this mystery for a while, this took place over the course of, like, 3 different sessions, I eventually just gave up and realized that I had reached another one of these situations, which constantly happens, where I'll give the players, like, here are 3 different clues. If you are willing to investigate any of these 3, you'll find the culprits. They don't look into any of them. And then they just stop even thinking about it. They just move on to something else. And I was like, well, I don't know what the fuck to do. But there's another storyline going on. Stas's sire is actively trying to kill him. He's been hunting him down for a while. Because that's Stas's backstory, is that he betrayed his sire. And because Stas is a computer hacker, his sire has gone and ghouled another computer hacker to locate Stas. And he has been trying to locate him. And the computer hacker has now found Stas and is trying to get more information about him. The computer hacker actually does the work of following up on these investigations to find out, like, who's been buying lots of garlic salt? Where did that van come from? Right? This was the first instance of that, where the hacker decides, I'm going to try and get this guy killed by leading him to the vampire hunters. Because these are vampire hunters. That's the reason why they have a dog. That's the reason why they have a flamethrower. That's the reason why they keep pouring garlic salt on vampires, because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Not only are they vampire hunters, they are the Scooby gang.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We got some work to do now.
Not like the Scooby gang, but like, you remember in Venture Brothers, where the Scooby gang showed up, but they were all like middle-aged and like super burnt out and violent, and like Shaggy was like psychotic and hearing the voice of like a dog or something that no one else could hear.
Just so they'll believe me. Not here to talk to them. You are the hand chosen by the master. No. Yours is the veil of blood. Yours is the sword of Michael.
And Daphne is a vampire slayer.
Interesting lady. Can we kill her?
Because throwing regular vampire hunters at the players basically is just, you may as well throw like guys from a supermarket at them. They just tear them to pieces. But a vampire slayer has some like potence, so there's at least a slim chance that they'll last a couple rounds, maybe inflict some damage. Granted, they never have in all the times I've used them, but this is who they run into. They find them, and weirdly, they don't do what I was 100% certain they would do, which is just roll up to this motel where the vampire hunters are hanging out in these hotel rooms. They're asleep, and just like kick open the doors and burst in. The doors were trapped, by the way. Instead, they decide to suddenly become incredibly fucking paranoid and sneaky in the way that they approach this. Emil turns into a mouse and like crawls through the ventilation shafts to sneak up into this room, where he gets detected in the ventilation shaft by the dog. But because these vampire hunters are not real bright about what vampires do, and the dog isn't, like, the dog can't talk, he's not really like Scooby-Doo. He can't be like, there's a vampire, or whatever Scooby-Doo would say. They just kind of like, they think there's like a cockroach or a rat in the vent, and they just ignore it. Paul and Emil, because they're playing the same character, both turn into rats, both sneak into here. And then Emil uses animalism to like possess the dog. So he's a rat who then falls unconscious, possesses the dog, so now he's playing Scooby-Doo. Paul then like bursts out and turns into a lumberjack in the room, and then they begin the battle. And then hilariously, after there's a bomb on this door. Like they have a trap set on the motel door, so that if anyone forces it open, it sets off a phosphorus grenade that like throws fire, because they expect that maybe vampires will break in. Hilariously, the players spend probably the better part of an hour talking through how they're going to sneak into this place without opening the door, even though they don't know there's a trap on the door. And then as soon as they do it, and they've successfully evaded the trap, they get into the room, and then Emil, as the dog, looks out the window, is like, burr, 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 and Stas just fucking kicks the door open and sets off the grenades anyway.
Because we're smart.
He's like set on fire and is panicking and trying to set out the fire. Then from there's like two motel rooms. I think the players didn't even realize that it was two motel rooms, because you have like this room, which is where the two guys are, and then the room next door is where the two girls are sleeping. So they're in the room with like Shaggy and Fred and the dog. In the next room are the actually way more dangerous vampire hunters, Velma and Daphne, because Velma has a flamethrower and Daphne has superpowers. So they come crashing out and attack them with a flamethrower. Somehow, Velma manages to botch her rolls so badly that she fails to hit anyone with this flamethrower. And Stas, even though he was already like almost destroyed by this phosphorus grenade, Stas grabs the flamethrower and turns it on her and sets her on fire.
What a twist!
Ian comes rocking in with a sword like, I'm gonna fuck these people up. First gets like just clocked by this vampire slayer, knocked into torpor. Then the dog rushes, Scooby-Doo rushes, and Daphne knocks the dog out, like punches the dog's head completely off of its body, which forces Emil out of the dog and back into his mouse form. Not to be put off, Emil asks one of these typical questions that only a player character would ask, which is, can I still use feral claws in mouse form? And I'm like, yeah, I guess you can. So even though he's perfectly capable of turning back into a person, he just like charges and springs and climbs up this vampire slayer in mouse form and then feral clauses into her throat, killing her.
Those who hunt by night will tell you that the wildest and most vicious of all animals
are in Vegas.
Is the tiny shrew.
A shrew? Come on.
Ko was sitting in like in the car the whole time. He just like he sits in the back of the SUV while his ghouls drive them there, and then he just sits there like a mom who's like driving the kids to a band practice or something.
Have fun, kids! I'll just be here listening to my tunes.
Of course, the motel is on fire because everywhere the players go, they always set everything on fire. And they like wake up Gideon. They're like pouring blood down Gideon's throat because Gideon has the like necromancy thing where she can turn bodies to dust. They're like, drink this blood, wake up, get over here and dust these bodies. God, stop sleeping on the job. And Gideon's like, oh, I'm sorry, and gets up and starts like melting bodies as the entire motel is now setting on fire. Fire alarms are going off. People are running out into the streets screaming. And then they just climb up into the car and drive away home. So yeah, that was their introduction to Portland, which seems to be a pretty fucked up place, but don't worry, I'm sure Portland will turn out to be fine. Just gotta give it some time. That's the story. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in space.
I can feel a mystery coming on.
Ted, you said I could see my parents.
This was on the way, Patty.
We've been driving to my parents' house for 10 years. You promised.
Patty, being out of your box isn't a right. It's a privilege. Baby, you don't want to go back in your box, do you?